This time I'm going to show you how to make this really sweet gift bag, and it's got petal shapes around the top and it closes with a drawstring. It's very simple to make and it makes a perfect gift wrap for Christmas time or for birthdays or for any occasion where you want to give a gift that's really, really special. I'll leave all of the measurements and cutting details in the description box below the video, but meanwhile, let's just get sewing. So I have my outer fabric, I've got my lining piece, my channel to thread the ribbon through, my ribbon and a 3-inch template. I've got an old ribbon bobbin that measures exactly the right size for me, and of course the marking tool. On the wrong side of the outer fabric I've already ironed on some fusible interfacing. This is a Vlieseline H200, so it gives it a nice firmness, but it's not too firm, like as if I was using a fusible fleece. So the first thing we're going to do is to draw the arches across the top here. Now, depending on the exact size of your circle and the exact size of your fabric, you may find that you've got a little bit of fabric left over at the end. That's fine, you just trim it down. So we're going to start about 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters away from the edge, and place your circle template so that the top of the circle is just on the top of the fabric, and draw. You could make this with a larger circle template. You'd have obviously fewer little petals, but if you don't have the exact 3 inches, then have a look for something that's quite close. And again, you may need to trim the fabric down a little bit when you get to the end. That's absolutely fine. So just keep going all the way across, like so. Just coming up to the end. And you can see I've got a gap at the end of my fabric, so I'm going to trim it down. If my template was maybe 1/4 of an inch bigger, it could take me up to the end of the fabric. There is an exact science into measuring exactly how much fabric you're going to need, but I find it quicker to do it this way than work out the maths, to be honest. So I'm just going to trim this back to the edge of the circle. Remember, do that through both pieces, through your lining and through your outer fabric. And I've got a little strip of fabric there that I can save for some trimming. Now, we're not going to cut this yet, we're going to sew it. So I'm just going to pop a few pins in here to hold the lining to the outside of the bag. And then I'm going to use quite a small stitch on my sewing machine, so I'm going down to 2.2, and I'm going to sew all the way around. So actually I'm going to go across here like that, and then go all the way around, and then finish up coming across on this side. Just one little tip: when you get to the point here, make 1 stitch going across before you go up again. Won't make any difference to the shape, but just 1 stitch across in the corner will help these pieces be a little bit more pointy when we turn it the right side out. So take your time as you're doing this, because this is forming the shape of those petal shapes. So we want a nice smooth line. So again, come down into the bottom of the point, just 1 stitch straight across, and then back down again, and we'll continue all the way across the fabric. So now let's take out the pins, and we can cut around the shape. So I'm cutting quite close to the seam, so maybe 2 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch away. Whoops. I'm going to snip into the corner there up to the stitches, and when I come round to the points, I'm going to snip really close up to that line, you know, the stitch that I sewed straight across, really close to that. And then we're going to turn this the right side out. Now, if it helps, you could use something like, oh, there we go, the rounded end of your point turner to just push out those curves. And then we'll press it. So nice, good old press around the top. I'm going to use a little bit of spray just to help crease the edges. So you could use a little bit of starch if your fabric needs it. I was using Best Press. And again, let's push those curves out so they're nice and even, and we'll give it a press. And you can see in the points here how they have turned out nice and pointy, and that's because we did that one stitch across, so that's worked really well. There we go. Now while I just have my iron here, I'm going to fold the ends of the channel over by about 1/2 inch. And I'll just sew across those. And then I'm going to fold the edges, make sure that the raw edge is on the inside, that's facing upwards. Again, I'm going to give this a spray to make it nice and crisp. And then fold the edges over by about 1/4 inch. No need to measure. And press them. So as long as they're even, they're the same distance, so you get a nice straight line for your channel, that's fine. And the same on the opposite side. So you're left with a channel that's about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters wide. As long as it's wide enough to accommodate your ribbon, that's fine. So just keep folding. Whoops, went a bit wrong. There we go. There, we can put that to one side for now. Then we're going to take the main part of our bag again, and we're going to fold it over so that the two edges are meeting. So this is why we left a little gap at the side here, because that's your seam allowance. And we're going to sew straight down the side. Be aware that we don't want to sew over these circles, so I'm actually going to fold those out of the way, and I'm going to start sewing at the seam, so I know that I haven't caught them, but I also know that the seam matches. carry on sewing. Now, so that I can make sure that the seam is going to be at the back of my bag, I'm going to open up the base and pop the seam in the centre. Just got a little fabric that's moved a bit there, so I'm just going to trim this back to make it straight. Okay, and then we'll sew straight across here. Trim that back a bit more. So you can measure that if you wanted to make sure it's in the centre, but I think you can gauge it by eye quite easily. And the same with this side. Now, to make the base square, I'm going to take my little ruler and marking pen again, and I'm just going to square it off slightly, so only by an inch. So you can see where my stitch line was here. I'm going to draw a box from that stitch line to the edge of the fold, so I've got an even square when I cut this out. And the same on all four corners. Then we'll cut out those squares before we square off the bases. So it may look like you're cutting out an oblong shape, but it is actually a square from where the seam is. Let's do the same on this side. And then we're going to pull open the corners of those squares, squish them together and sew straight across the end. Do the same on all the corners. So I'm just folding the seam open. It doesn't really matter whether it goes to one side or the other. And the same across the lining. And do excuse my barky dog, she's having a whale of a time in the garden. I think we've got lots of passers-by today. She likes to make herself known. So again, open up the corner, sew straight across. And then we can push the lining inside the bag. Oh, turn it the right side out. So where's my turning gap? Here we go. So pull all of this through. Then I've got the turning gap to close. So I'm just going to pull the edges away from each other and sew straight across there. You could hand sew that if you want it to be perfectly invisible. Then we can push the lining inside the bag and push out those corners. So now we put the channel on. And the reason I've left it until now is because I want the, when I draw it up, I want it to draw all of the fabric. And sometimes you can find that if you're only pulling the fabric on the outside. So if I'd have put that channel on right at the beginning, put it on the outside, the lining just goes a little bit baggy. So I like it to kind of all gather up together at the same time. And I want it to meet at the front of the bag, because remember I put the seam down the back, in which case my channel needs to go over the top of the back and then round the front. It won't quite meet, that's the whole idea. So let's fold this so that the seam's in the centre. I'm just going to crease the centre of the channel and pop it down here. About 1 inch away from the bottom I think would work well. And we'll have lots of pins. Now try and keep this straight so that when you come round to the front of the bag, the ends meet. If they don't, maybe your fabric's a little bit too long, you can always trim some back at this point. And if they don't meet evenly in the centre, you can just rearrange this until they do. It doesn't have to be spot on perfect, so don't worry about perfection with something like this. So you can see as I'm coming round to the front here, I've just got a little bit of a gap. I don't know where all these threads come from. But the main thing is I want these to be level. So if they're not, again, you can just keep rearranging this until they sit perfectly, till it looks good. Right, then I'm not going to sew over the ends. I'm going to sew all the way around the top and the bottom, quite close to the edge, and make sure when you get to the end or when you start, you backstitch a few times, because that's going to be the part of the bag that takes the stress when you pull the drawstring. So I'll use the free arm on my machine. And let's pop the needle down here. And so again, quite close to the edge of the channel, because you need to leave enough room, remember, for the ribbon to actually thread through. Snip off my excess threads, then take your ribbon, here we are, right in front of me, put that back on there now, and you'll need enough ribbon to just wrap around the whole bag and a little bit extra. Then we'll take a safety pin and pop the ribbon onto the end and thread it through. And tie it in a nice big bow. Arrange the little petals on the top so you can see them. And that's my gift bag finished. So I hope you enjoy making yours. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.